Welcome to our Zoom discussion. August 21st marks this World Senior Citizen Day. And with us here as a discussion panel, we have two ladies who are great influences of Malta society, one of the civil society and one in the business world. We have an educator who is worldwide traveled, and we have a lady from Cameroon who is the executive of the African Media Association. Now, Claudia is the CEO of SOS Malta, which is the first international NGO of Malta who was helping to alleviate hunger and poverty overseas. Nowadays, actually, SOS Malta is aiding so many NGOs, and Claudia helped really greatly to the civil sector to develop, as a matter of fact. And SOS Malta hosts many NGOs, and NWAMI International Malta is one of them. Thank you, Claudia, for attending. Helga Ellul is known as a former CEO of Playmobil Malta and a former president of the Malta Chamber of Commerce. Today, Helga is the president of the Core Platform, promoting and educating corporates and societies about corporate social responsibility. David is an associate professor of Maastricht School of Management and runs his own consulting company. He's lecturing at the management school internationally, programs around the world. He traveled 27 countries in South Asia, lecturing subjects like operations, management, strategic management, leadership, and innovation. Thank you, David, for attending today. Then we have Regine Nguini Dang Psaila from Cameroon. Regine is the executive of African Media Association Malta, an organization that was set up by the African journalists in Malta, using their professional skills to help migrants to learn about living in Malta and about effective integration. The way we experience our life and the way we see, the way we have our cultural beliefs shape social norms and values. This also includes our views on aging and on the role of older people in society. COVID-19 changed people's lifestyles around the globe almost overnight, and it affected the elderly disproportionately. This year's theme poses therefore the question, pandemics, do they change how we address age and aging? I would like to invite our panelists to share their thoughts. From your observation, did the pandemic really change how we approach aging and the aging process across societies? What do you think? Helga or Claudia?
I can start. I mean, to be honest, I think, Gabby, obviously the elderly and the aging population were the most vulnerable one, or most of the vulnerable one. I think it's a very young one and the aging who were really affected more than anything. And especially on the aging one, they had obviously a very decreased social life. They experienced physical isolation from their loved ones, much fewer personal interactions, which obviously led, in my opinion, to a decreased quality of life, a loneliness, which they already have a bit, but in a far greater way. Also, I think it increased a lot their health. And we are obviously not only Malta, but I think worldwide, there has been an increase in mental health issues. And I think in the elderly as well, mental health and sort of expression goes very much into cognitive decline and a risk of Alzheimer. And I think one of the greatest things which came out was actually the digital great divide. Because obviously in lockdown, we had all very, very fast got everything onto online. Many services, including the healthcare services, shifted into digital online. But you have to understand that elderly didn't have this benefit. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have access to the new digital technology. And some of them even have less motivation to use it and don't know how to use it. So I think that was a very great issue which came out, which obviously then leads how we have to address that for the future, because it's something to stay. But maybe we'll have the thoughts of the other panel on that.
Thank you, Helga. I mean, that actually leads to greater isolation, even more the disconnect or the gender or the generation gap. Claudia, what do you think of?
Yeah, I won't go into it because, of course, I fully agree with what Helga has said. I think it showed us all the lack of budgeting for aging and for the elderly. How proactive were our governments in addressing also the issues of isolation, loneliness, because let's face it, before the pandemic also reached us, if one looks at the way our elderly are looked upon and the facilities that we have, even at community and societal level, I mean, that was greatly enhanced because of the pandemic. And I think we need to be a little bit creative and innovative now to be able to see why it happened that our elderly were so lonely, so isolated during the pandemic. The fear, in fact, and they couldn't be with their loved ones, but also for the elderly who were in the community, like me. I was still living in the community. I wasn't living in a home. So the fears and the anxieties were all there. And when you're locked up in a space which you've got to make do with what you have around you, I think the digital divide, as Helga said, was extremely relevant now, and really aware of how much we have to work on minimizing this divide. And also virtual reality. How can we start introducing virtual reality into the homes for the elderly, for people who are suffering even from mental health issues, who couldn't have the face-to-face physical counseling that they had, whereas virtual reality, I think, can open a huge world for us to be able to dismiss a lot of the discrimination, the poverty that there was. And also, I think our authorities, our governments need to be looking at well-being at a much higher level, giving it the importance that it requires digitally, but also face-to-face.
Very valid points and very deep thinking. David, what do you think about that?
Yes, definitely the points that have been raised are all extremely valid. I think we need to possibly start even by saying, okay, what are we considering as elderly? Today we call, like a 60 plus the elder at an official level, but is that really the case? And obviously it could be related to your state of health that determines how old, you are considered to be in society. But I think what COVID has done as well, it's given us a new awareness about the needs of the elderly, which we could have been taking for granted. Now, I experienced this, I would say, firsthand with my mother. My mother is 92, still living alone, but there was a time, now she lives literally down the road from where I live. So on a normal basis, we have quite a lot of contact, but during lockdown, we did not even enter her house. There were weeks we were just talking through the door. in that sense and hoping that everything's okay on the inside. The point of the digital divide, obviously, this is where we are now. I would say, in a way, if I look at my mother's generation, they missed the digital transformation. In other words, they were already too old to convert comfortably. I would say I am technologically conversant today, but if I tell myself, in 20 years' time, if I'm still around, am I still going to be up to date with the technologies of that time, not of what I know today? If I live till 80, 85, am I going to cope in that world with artificial intelligence, robotics? Who knows what we're going to have in that time? You can't even imagine it. So this is a message even to people who are not considered elderly yet, but thinking about it. We need to keep up to date. We cannot afford anymore for the same thing to happen to us as what happened to the elderly generation of today. They missed out. And this is the paradox, isn't it? That all the technologies that helped the younger ones keep in touch, order food online, and do everything technologically, they could not do. So definitely there is a need, even today, for government and even maybe private institutions to say, how can we get the elderly a bit more up to date to at least cope a bit better? Now, I do know some elderly people that do use technology and can cope with a Skype call and speak to their children abroad. So sometimes there's even a need issue here. If you really need something, you'll find a way to get over it. So this is an important thing as well. Obviously, the issue of isolation has hit because a lot of elderly people tend to care for grandchildren very often. Contact with grandchildren was, of course, even instructed by the authorities to stop. And to an elderly person, I would say that is part of their scope of living, you know, to be with and look after grandchildren. Now, of course, in Maltese society, being a small country, this is in a way easier to do. And my concern is if we found our elderly on a small island like Malta having problems, then what happened in big countries where family was nowhere around, miles away? So I don't even want to blame the family. I mean, this is the way it is. I could go and speak to my mother every day through the door, but what happened in bigger countries? So probably the loneliness, the isolation hit people overseas 100 times worse than it hit the elderly in Malta. Of course, these are things we need to think about. And if we do have elderly people, we need to think, how can we prepare if something like this has to happen again? And it might come back again. I mean, we don't know when this whole pandemic is really going to be over, or if we're going to cycle through. So even at family level, I think people need to get together and sort of plan and discuss how we're going to look after our elderly parents, for that matter. But having said that, there's a big government obligation to look into what needs to be done for the elderly as well, to make their lives more comfortable, less stressful, because apart from being a physical problem, this COVID is also a mental health problem. And
David,
these are the issues we need to look into.
Thank you so much for your very valid points, David. You already mentioned how it might look in other countries, in other worlds. And in this regard, I would like to ask a question to Regine. Separation from family and friends predispose particularly immigrant and refugee seniors to a higher vulnerability. What, in your opinion, are the risk factors for immigrant senior citizens, Regine? Because I think we cannot expect a digital divide we experience here, but even the access to digitalization or the knowledge about is not be assumed in different cultures as well. Can you share a little bit your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Gabriela. I wanted to say a few words about the first question that we asked, because I think that we should mention an important fact that was not spoken about. I am here also representing a little bit of the diversity into the health system. I must say first that unfortunately there is also racism into the health system, meaning that the elderly people from immigrant background who end up in those places, not only they were suffering of everything that was said of the isolation, of the digital divide, of everything else, but also think of the fact that they were also suffering of the fact that they are different color, of different religion. So that was even double, because thinking of an immigrant who have been through his life of discrimination at the hospital, in school, and then growing up in the society where he knows where his second place is, and that finding himself in a place where the person is at the mercy of those people who really think of him as a second class is even more difficult. So I wanted to add to the point that this was also a challenge for elderly immigrants who find themselves in homes. So now to come back to your question about the risk factor of immigrants, let me say that the way society treats elderly person today assign them a vulnerable role. And so they are vulnerable already, not only because of their age and the fact that some of them need permanent support because of illness or other such conditions, but because the pension plan is about waiting to die at your home or wherever. If you do not resist by planning yourself any creative activities. And for senior immigrants, it is even worse, because immigrants are the most vulnerable groups in any society everywhere, because they are treated as already said, second-class citizens in all sectors everywhere of the society. And I say it again, unfortunately, also in hospitals and in homes. I have experienced it personally. I know what I am talking about. So for immigrants who already know their role in the society, there is second-class role. And it is traumatic to think that they will end up in a system that is overwhelmed by a crisis that no one understands about yet. The government, the doctors, really so how they are into that system. And let me explain you how they can feel about them being into such a system. To say it a free word, it is scary. I will be scary if I was 60 years old here in Malta when COVID started to find myself in a care home. I will be very scary being a Black woman in Malta or any other place in Europe. And so I want also to mention the fact that even for the vaccine, when we saw that first there were the Maltese and then the European citizens and then the immigrants came second to take the vaccine. All these factors put the elder person in a state of who am I? Am I survive? Am I even taken into consideration in this place where I live? So these are the issues that we're facing immigrants. And so as a solution to that, I can say maybe 3 things to say that the resilience that immigrants build throughout their life in any society, it is there, not always easy, but they manage to come up with solutions to support each other. I will think of one of the solutions. First of all, I will say that there's a conversation that is needed, and I think that is important for such a platform like now to always have a diversity, because it is important to bring that aspect which is sometimes not even considered because we don't live it. So a conversation about racism in health system must be on the agenda, because it is real, it hurts, and people die because of that. During COVID, studies in the UK and in the US unfolded the fact that the death toll into the minorities was higher because of that, because doctors were going to what people offer to those who come first. So the other was just coming a second. So the communities then must also, after the fact that we need to talk about this, the community must think of a support to each other for the health, for the elderly people, because in many regions in Africa, and I also know in Muslim countries, elderly people still live in the homes with their families. There's not yet this, diffuse a policy of placing them in home. So supporting each other, even if they don't have time, look after my mother today, look after my father today, I will come to do the same with you tomorrow. Try to support each other because they know what they face if they find themselves in a vulnerable situation. So that support must exist among them. A third solution that I will also consider is actually to repatriate the elderly person. Let's say if my mother lives with me here and then she's 80 years old, I will think of if I have the possibility to sending her back to Cameroon so she go to die in a place that is welcoming to her. This will be a bit of the contribution that I can bring to that question.
Thank you so very much, Regine. Any response to Regine's remarks, please, from your end?
I'd like to come in on this because I've been discussing pensions for migrants and also looking at, I don't think we understand that the migrants are going to age in our country.
Yes.
There's no planning for the migrant population. There's no mainstreaming for them. And this is something which needs to be taken on board. The conversation needs to start. Plans need to be put in place and a strategic approach that an elderly migrant or a senior citizen, because that's what we're talking about, is looked upon as I am looked upon as a senior citizen and is mainstreamed. You see, what worries me is that we don't realize that migrants are here to stay and migrants are going to age with us. And there's no planning. There's no national budget.
But Claudia, I think what we heard from Regina and what you are saying, I fully agree. But I think we need as well to start in everything. I mean, all right, for the aging, maybe especially, but this divide we have to overcome that. And there has to be an integration. We cannot anymore say the Maltese and then the immigrant. I mean, we have to, whatever we do has to be for the society in general we are today. And part of it will be aging immigrants. They're going to be here. So whatever we are doing on pension plans and whatever, they have to be part of the national solution. But I think one of the things I would like to discuss a bit with you, because it's always occupying me, and what Regina said as well, that in the other countries where elderly still live much more with families, where we don't have this culture of homes, this is a debate I have very much, where I say we have very much in Malta gone this way of, because youngsters are working now and both are working, into elderly people at homes, which I have a bit of a problem, because I still feel that the best solution is a strong community. Yes. And I think that's where we need to dig into much more in everything, be it in training for the digital divide, being in healthcare, that in our case in Malta, our local communities are not working and don't have the power to work properly. And I think that's where we have a problem. It's still all central. Central, you can make overall strategic and budgets, but then it's a community down where they live, which has to be active and where they feel at home. And it's not like David said as well in other countries where the family is not so closely linked. I mean, the elderly and everybody lives in a community, and this community spirit and power of the community has to be enhanced, in my opinion. And I would like to hear your thoughts to that a bit.
Can I say something, Rita? About the community? When again, I will just come to that again. The immigrant population in Malta, unfortunately, the immigrant population in Malta is a population that come from the majority, I believe, so that comes in a regular way. So there is not a strong diaspora that matters here in Malta. So the diaspora in Malta doesn't have that voice that can discuss about what when Claudia mentioned the planning and discussing about planning for the pension, that diaspora is lacking. So if you don't have that strong diaspora, it will be even difficult to plan the communities, as you just said, like, let's build the community in such a way that our elderly people belong to everything that the government puts in place, like, PC training or digital training, everything that's related to that. So the reason also because the majority of those asylum seekers who come here, or that population who come here to work. So there is not openness to education that will lead them to the fact that this is an important aspect of the life that we must push to our people. So it's lacking there. And what I will also think, or I will add, is that we have, I think, to render all people the more autonomous possible, because I know from experts, from my reading, that physical exercise is a very good way of remaining independent, of keeping your brain alive for a longer period of time. So it takes you, or even prevent, it can actually even prevent degenerative diseases. So for me, building a powerful community around the physical exercise, which is a cheap plan. I always go for a cheap plan because I'm from the part of thinking of the immigrants. This is a cheap plan. You go run every day for 30 minutes. You do something physical for 30 minutes, thinking that when you will be old, look, this society is not really there for you. So try to protect yourself. So when you are 60 years or 70 years or 80 years old, you're still capable of looking after yourself. You have built that strength, that resilience through physical exercise, which is a simple solution. And I think it is easy to eat and do things, but when you know what the children of today, the immigrants of today go through, and that you know that that's where I might end up if something like COVID happens, that I will end up in a home where, again, I will be looked after in a second place or in a third place. So I built my own solution when I still have the power to do it. I wanted to add that into the conversation. So maybe we can also add this physical part of, self-resilience, self-autonomy.
So to be proactive and fight for your independence as well, as long as you can. David, what are your thoughts to what you have heard so far? And
yes, I think this pension issue is a very, very topical point. Because, of course, we want to welcome migrants who are ready to work. In fact, right now we are saying we've got a lack of employment, we need more people. So, of course, if people want to come to Malta to work, we're going to tell them, come along and work. But I think Claudia really brought up the key issue. In 20, 30 years' time, if these people obviously settle in Malta and stay here, because it's one thing if people came for 2 years and moved on, but some will stay. What's going to be their lot at that point in time? Because most foreigners, immigrants, probably are renting property, for example. We even need to think about housing. What's going to happen when they stop working? Who's going to pay the rent? And the rent, as we know, is not cheap here. How are they going to suddenly have money to buy a property? Are we even thinking along those lines? What are people going to do in that realm? What if they don't? Now, we all know what a government pension is about. Even if you've worked for the last 40 years of your life, we know the limitations there are there. So what is going to happen to these people? So yes, it is definitely a physical resilience issue. Keep strong and healthy as long as possible. So that Regine really brought up an important point. Look after yourself. Have that resilience physically. But we also need to think about the financial resilience as well. As in, are you going to be able to support yourself when you stop working and retire in Malta as an immigrant that might not have a large, close family around you? So these are very, very topical issues. it is very important, obviously, for government to take this on board and needs a solution. Because if they're just going to delay the problem, then of course it's going to hit. And then, as always, we just come up with quick fix solutions, which really don't solve anything and really create another 3 or 4 problems in the meantime. So we've got to think of that. It's one thing also telling people go to a care home. Are we talking about a state care home? Are we talking about a private one? And if it's private, I think we all know what the prices are like. Who's going to pay for that? The children, the parent, the person. Have you saved enough money to support yourself for maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years in a care home? So even there becomes a problem. If you don't have the money, does your family have the money to support you? It's a supply and demand issue as well. Go and apply. See how long that waiting list is. When are they going to call you to go in? So we've got a problem even in a supply and demand situation, even for locals, what I call Maltese people. What about the immigrant population then? Where is their place? So this really becomes a very, very difficult but pertinent problem. There are solutions, for sure, there are solutions to every problem, but we're not hearing enough being discussed in this regard. Now, of course, Helga also brought up this idea of community. People live in a community, but we also need to define who is responsible for this word community. Who is leading it? Who is organizing it? So are we saying the local council here? So we need to see, what does the local council do for the elderly population? I know some of them organize events and they take them on outings. At least where I live, there is a small sense of people do tend to care. Going back to my mother, if she goes shopping, for example, she never has to carry anything home. At least if she is shopping in the vicinity, they will always take anything she buys and sometimes even help walk her back home. So I don't even feel I have to be the one there. In some places, there is a sense of community. It might not happen everywhere. But again, this is an issue of culture. This is an issue of values. This is an issue of education as well, which again needs to be taken as a central focus by our local councils, because they are the ones that at least have this umbrella over the community at a smaller level. So a lot can be done to find ways. And what I can say is during COVID, especially during lockdown, our local council, I live in the Swee local council, had organized people who were volunteers to go shopping, to deliver things, to even cook for the elderly, because of course they knew who the elderly were. And there were quite a few people that did help out in this respect.
David, can I interrupt you here?
Definitely.
Can I interrupt you here?
Of course.
Did we need a pandemic for volunteers at community level to help out the senior citizen? No. And this is what we need to instill. I mean, and the intergenerational development needs to be seen and felt by the senior citizen.
Absolutely.
I mean, we haven't spoken about the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience that the senior citizen can bring to our communities. How can we merge the youth with the senior citizen to bring about these changes? Absolutely. How can we as a senior citizen, us as senior citizens, not you, Regine, I would say, you know, bring about this conversation with the younger generation, how important it is that the senior citizens in our community need to be respected, but our teachers also, teachers on what they need to learn to be resilient in the world we are living in today. I mean, during COVID, I brought all my senior citizen friends online to be able to communicate together and to keep our sanity a little bit at a level of acceptance, basically, you know. we need to be proactive. We need to take initiatives, and we mustn't be afraid of taking initiatives. I mean, Helga, you and I at our organizational level brought mobility scooters to our locality for the elderly. That's a great initiative, but how can senior citizens develop into driving their mobility scooters when our pavements are so rotten?
Yeah.
So it's these little things which our government and even our local councils need to be looking at, you know, that for mobility, we need to have proper pavement. We need to have proper roads. Our speed limit in the roads, because of the mobility scooters, needs to go down. You know, it's all a conversation which needs to happen. We are an aging population.
Correct.
We are an aging population. So the investment and the strategies and the planning for the elderly need to be there and need to be taken now, because I think a lot of us have waited far too long for a lot of things to happen in our localities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your valid input, Claudia. This is a matter of working hand in hand with the civil sector and the government sector and the corporate sector. That there needs to be a joint effort here. Now, that actually brings me to the second question. I mean, how can individuals and communities help? And looking into the future, what healthy standards for old people would need to be set?
Let me tell you, number one, we need to identify role models who are going to really project the needs of the senior citizen at local level, but also at national level. I think
Claudia, you made a very important point before, which I think needs maybe to be a bit more discussed as well. How can we bring old and young closer together? Because I mean, the young ones are the future, they are driving, but they will age, they will get older, and they can learn so much from the experience of the older people. I mean, you see it as well. I mean, we know it all, like grandchildren love to listen to what grandma talks about her life, or grandpa. They love the storytelling, and there is value in it because there are experiences, there are learnings in it. So bringing together, if these youngsters, young people today understand more the needs of the aging, and there's this closer cooperation, I think they are the ones who do set the agenda for the future. But we elderly one have to go to them and they listen. Don't, you know, we are there. We can give. We are not just a burden. We can give as well. There's a lot you can get out of the experience of elderly people. I think we mustn't see them always as a burden and just the negative, but also the positive. Absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are, or the young ones wouldn't be where they are today if it wouldn't have been for the elderly of today. So I think this needs to be this closeness between, or this bridging of the ages is one of, in my opinion, one of the most important ones. I don't know, what is your view, David, on that? For example?
This is, of course, you know, part of education, part of culture as well, in terms of respect for the elderly. I mean, if any of you have worked in Asia, you will recognize the cultural respect there is towards elderly people. Whether you are a teacher, whether you are a father or a grandfather, it is just embedded within them because of what you rightly said, the experience, the wisdom, the fact that you are ready to give them your knowledge, and they are thanking you in a way and respecting you for all that. So there's a lot of respect towards that. Western society could suffer a bit in that respect. Okay?
Regine, what David just said, how is that in your culture? How is it in Cameroon? How is it in Africa? How is it in the cultures you experienced, you work with?
Yes, let me tell that, to be honest, when Claudia speak about intergenerational, and then And what I saw here during COVID about the support to the communities by the young people doing shopping for the old people, it's for me something new. I've never seen it before, but because of what, maybe it was just maybe a kind of a prejudice that we have or toward the European community, because of the European society, because of the way they treat the old people. We usually in Africa, we believe that European citizens dish the old people when they have used them and then they don't need them anymore, and they abandon them in care homes. So that is something that we feel very strongly this week. It is something, an abomination for us. You know, how can you abandon your parents in a home because you are too busy at work? And for me, that aspect was an eye-opener for me. I actually reconcile a lot with that idea that, yeah, maybe, you know, if you go as far as putting your parent in the home, and then you actually looks after him in the way that the person can be happy, why not? But really, let me bring in the perspective of Africa, of Cameroon in particular. You don't think of course, putting your parent in a home. You might know it. It just doesn't happen. And during COVID, what happened is that, of course, we were talking about social distancing. And when it was possible, was it even possible most of the time? No, because of the way people live. We live in community. There's no way you're going to put your father in a room. And those who could afford to do it, the person in the house still hear every familiar voices. The person for whom he cares are always around him. It's that same hand, that loving hand that comes to give him the food. So the people were not disconnected from their everyday life. The challenges of COVID were lived as a community together. Yes, those who were dying more were those who are elderly people, but they were not abandoned to die in some place where they just felt that, you know, that I could have died here from COVID or for anything else. This was a kind of a normal life, apart from the fact that maybe in some places they couldn't go out as they used to be. So really, I hope that I answered to your question there. Africa.
Regine, yes, sorry to interrupt you, but my interest is what, in your opinion, could be done? How, in your opinion, could we bridge the cultural gap and strengthen communities to support each other? Or what can individuals do for the migrant situation, for the immigrant situation right now? What support would you like to see?
I think we should start a campaign, because when you contacted me for this talk, the idea wasn't me, because okay, I am 52, so but I'm already there, you know, have to. But I tried to look for a senior citizen to come and talk here. I asked, no one was ready, no one wanted, you know. It was about, what do you want me to go and say there, you know, always the usual things, and then nothing happens for us. So really, there's a very much a distrust, you know, a disinterest of everything that happened to the society, because people feel that they don't belong to the society. So I think a campaign about the place of elder people, not only Maltese, but also a Black person or Muslim person, is important. That campaign will show them, because we don't even see them. How many old Black people do you see in the street here in Malta? You know, because they are stuck in houses. They don't go anywhere because
Exactly.
they don't belong to this society. So for me, a campaign that really targets that aspect of this, that fragment of the society, that segment of the society, is a solution for what we're discussing. Even the poster that you created behind you, placing a Black person there will be good as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I try to find something, when I tried to find something online about senior citizens, there was no picture, no Black person, no person of color in the entire scene. So, and I had no time to create something. So you are absolutely right. And that is actually the work of NWAMI International Malta, is about social integration, is about multicultural integration. And multicultural doesn't mean only multi-ethnic. It also means all levels of society, the young, the old, different ethnicities, you know, throughout the spectrum of society. And there is a lot of work to be done. And as you rightly said, you had a hard time to find some elderly person who comes and speaks up, because the silencing or the frustration is so high, and we need to tackle that in our work as NGOs, as a matter of fact, to bring them on board, to have their voices heard, even with social hubs or social gatherings or storytelling meetings where people feel included and where their voices are heard, as a matter of fact. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. What are the opinions of others? Claudia, what do you think?
In the field of migration, there's much to do. We know it. I mean, it's moving slowly. We know that migration management has failed, not only at a national level, but also, I would say, at a European level. Hard and concrete decisions for unifying and bringing migrants to our countries in the manner that we are is totally unacceptable after so many years. So it's sometimes, I mean, it's so frustrating working in the migration field, because you feel you're getting somewhere, but then never reach anywhere. Migrants still are suffering today. Integration is not being looked upon
In kind.
in a holistic way. I mean, does Malta have a black policeman? Does Malta have a black face on our televisions? Are you welcomed by a cultural, diverse people at the desks when people are coming into our airports? No, we still don't have anything like this. No. So we have a long way to go still. We're still looking at migration as NGOs, but project-based. There's no national budget for migration. Migrants are here to stay. Migrants are going to be with us. Migrants are serving us. You know, we need equality. We need mainstreaming. You know, they need to feel comfortable in what we're doing. One positive element which came out of the COVID was equity to the vaccine, at least.
Yes.
That, I think, is a good practice. Malta showed the whole of Europe that the vaccine was equitable and migrants could access for vaccine if they had a proper identity card, mainstreamed with us, but also if they didn't. So I think we should build on this good practice now. We have recognized that the migrant, needs to have equitable access to the vaccine, but they need to have equitable access to many more services in our country. And I think for the senior citizen, because we're talking about that, it's something which is going to reach us. And from what I read, why was the Senior Citizens Day, I think Ronald Reagan was the one who brought it into the world. To recognize what the senior citizen is doing. How are we going to recognize what the senior citizen is doing? How are we going to honor our senior citizens? And not only senior Maltese citizens, but to honor senior citizens at of any ethnic origin in our country. And these are the messages we need to show to our population. Let us eliminate the racism, the hatred that there is, at all levels of our society. We cannot tolerate this anymore. No. I was happy to see that football now, they will stop again. Yes, stop it. Good. We need to stop it. Racism is totally unacceptable. So this is my message on Senior Citizens Day. Let us honor our senior citizens and make them an example and role models for our youth.
Thank you, Claudia. For a closing remark, I mean, that is a wonderful statement. Now, the closing question, as we started our discussion with pandemics, do they change how we address age and aging? Did they change? I mean, for a closing statement, coming back to the question, one last sentence, Regine.
Yes, thank you, Gabriela. Yes. I think that COVID changed the way the society look at the aging population, because the flaws that were identified in care homes was a hit, in the face of many governments. I know that there are still court cases going on because there are families who decided to ask questions, and they want to know why their loved one died, when it was clear that it wasn't because of the illness, or in some cases not even because of COVID, only just because of the health system was done in such a way that the aging population was not looked after the way it should, as if in many health systems they were pushing them to die, so that to liberate the space to accommodate more people. So I'm thinking that I will not go as far as saying that it was a blessing in disguise, but I think that the health system will be better, came better, because we could see how things were done in the wrong way because of some political decision. So definitely COVID was bad, but COVID improved a lot of how in the future elderly people will be looked after, at least in the health system.
David.
Yes, at the time, in one of Claudia's interventions, she said, did we need to wait for the pandemic to think about senior citizens? Yeah. I mean, obviously the answer to that is no, we didn't need to wait, but life is what it is. And sometimes it does take a trigger to create, a bit of an awareness to focus on a particular issue. And it did bring to light a number of issues where senior citizens are concerned. It brought about the financial situation, it brought about housing, whether they're living alone or in care homes, and the issues that go there. It brought about healthcare issues, access to healthcare, access to nutrition and food. It brought about the social issues, the level of mobility, the isolation, family interventions, entertainment. How do they entertain themselves at home? Do they have what it takes? And of course, as we discussed, the technological divide as well. Of course, the question now would be, is this just gonna be the hype during COVID, and once everything settles down, let's go back to the way we were? Or are we going to say now, okay, we've gone through a learning experience, we've been exposed to certain realities, weaknesses and deficiencies. Now, where does the responsibility lie as far as individuals are concerned, as far as family members are concerned, community, NGOs, government? And are we going to move on to try and address the weaknesses that we have identified during COVID? Because if we don't, at the end of the day, we who are talking here today are going to be the ones to suffer if something ever happens again, when we might not have the level of mobility we enjoy today. So it's always but someone needs to take the lead. And very often then you will need government to take the first lead. If government does take the lead, there's a high probability others tend to follow. Otherwise, you come to the situation where people say, what can I do? What difference can I make? And people give up before they even try doing anything. So we've learned a lot. We can move forward.
Thank you very much, David. These are very introspective thoughts. It poses a question to the question in itself. Now, Helga, what do you think? One sentence, pandemics.
Do
they change?
Similar to what I just heard from all the other participants. Obviously, it didn't need a COVID to bring it all out, but it did. Life is like that. When you are with the back to a wall, all of a sudden. But will it stay? Will we have lessons learned? Will we take it on board? Sometimes I'm almost a bit pessimistic, to be honest, because I think people just want to forget about it and think they can go back to what it was, which is not possible, because there are certain things which are going to stay. I think the most important part is, again, this lifelong learning, keeping abreast, digital. I think that is a must, and I think it is understood. The integration of immigrants. I mean, for me, it all goes into, again, what we are talking about, which is the future of sustainability. And that is part and parcel of all that as well. How are we going to be in future sustainable if we don't integrate immigrants, because we need them? Businesses have to realize that, governments have to realize it. They're aging. And I think as a parting word, I think the one thing which was very important, what Claudia said as well, and that should be the day of today for what we are celebrating today, is honor your elderly and have role models. Put together the young with the old. They wouldn't have what they have today if it wouldn't be for today's elderly. Listen to them, honor them, like maybe copy a bit what Asia has or what other older tribes had, but always the elderly or the wisdom, and you listen to them. And I think that should be the day to day, that you honor your elderly for what they have achieved and done for you.
Absolutely. And as images speak more than thousands of words, the visual I used in the background shows clearly how little thought is given with the international communities about multi-ethnic senior citizens, about migrants, about refugees. There should be included in the posters when we speak about Senior Citizens Day, and I appreciate and value Regine's comment on this very, very much, because there is none sorts of things, and this is where we all need to work hard, not to exclude, but to include. So with these words, I would thank you all for your participation, and yeah, I highly appreciate that we had such a rich discussion today. And let's keep it continuing to discuss and have another topic and another theme in the same line. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.